What a wonderful time we had in San Diego, California, meeting Barry Fell, Dr. Barry Fell, and his lovely lady, Mrs. Fell. They made us so welcome and such a home, with the history and their travels all represented there in the decorating of their home. How beautiful it is, and what an experience simply to be a guest there. Certainly our pilot, Jerry, and Harlan, and Mike, and myself were made to feel like kings there. They made us feel so welcome. Dr. Fell no longer travels, therefore we had the privilege at his invitation to come to San Diego in his home and film this series that you will be seeing with Dr. Fell. And prayerfully, there are going to be many more to come. What knowledge and wisdom. We just really thank them for the hospitality and the wisdom that was shared with us there in San Diego. I know you're going to enjoy it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are in San Diego, California. I feel honored that our crew has been invited in to Dr. Barry Fell's home. He and his precious wife. They've made us feel so welcome, and it's going to be a pleasure bringing to you the knowledge and the wisdom that this man has gained in his research in ever so many places around the globe. It's just something we really want to share with you. Dr. Fell, it is a pleasure indeed having you on our network, and we want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. In Denmark, we learned, when people said nice things like that to us, we learned to say "I lige måde," which means the same to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to us to have you come here. Not only a pleasure, but it makes me feel very lazy. You have to go to all this trouble, and I just stay here and you come to me. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome. It was a fine trip, and it's a pleasure being here. I would like to ask you probably a question that many people would like to ask you, Dr. Fell. What drew your attention, or what drew you into this particular field?
Yes, you're right. Many people do ask me that question. I think it goes back primarily to my college days, when I got interested in Maori inscriptions in New Zealand, when I was doing my graduate work in biological oceanography at the University of Edinburgh. I took advantage of some spare time to write a paper on Maori epigraphy, ancient Maori inscriptions, which was published with no difficulty, I found, in a journal called Man, put out by the Royal Anthropological Society. So I like to boast that my first paper was written when I was still a graduate student. It was on epigraphy, and it came out before my first paper on oceanography. However, after that I had to spend a long time doing many other things. World War II broke out while I was a student, and eventually, after Japan entered the war, I found myself a radar officer in the South Pacific, traveling from island to island, supposedly setting up radar stations. But while I was doing that, I would either see or hear of inscriptions cut in rocks or in coral, or painted sometimes in caves, that people knew about and would show me. And they looked to me like ancient writing. Some of it looked like what I imagined in those days would be Phoenician, and it didn't look like Latin or any language that I knew. Afterwards, I found out it was Libyan. And these islands were supposed to have been discovered by Captain Cook in the 18th century, and yet here was evidence of people having been there before with a writing system, not used by the people who live there now. So that started my interest. And I began to study those inscriptions. Then after the war was over, the next big thing that happened in the scientific world was the International Geophysical Year, 1958, and it lasted till 1962. And everybody that was anybody in the physical sciences tried to either get to the North Pole or to the South Pole, or to be associated with parties that were working there. I got loosely attached to the American parties in Antarctica. I didn't leave New Zealand, but I was working on some of the materials they gathered. And that ultimately led to my being invited to come to do that work at Harvard. So that's when my whole family moved in 1964 to North America. While at Harvard, I didn't give up my interest in these mysterious writings in the Pacific. And one day, while I had some diagrams or photographs of them on my table in my study, a reporter from the Harvard Gazette came into my office to ask me some question about biological oceanography, and he saw these pictures, and his interest immediately switched from what he had come to ask me about. Instead, he wanted to know what these things were on the table. So I told him, and he was very interested and published quite a good article about it in the Gazette. The next thing was the Boston Globe copied the article and added more to it. And the next thing after that was that archaeologists in New England started calling me up and saying, we know of places in New England where there are markings just like these ones you've got. Would you like to see them? I said, I'd love to. And lo and behold, there we were finding Libyan and Celtic inscriptions. I had no idea. Like everybody else, I thought Columbus was the first visitor to North America. So that's how I got started.
It seems that it's kind of a shock as to when a person first begins to make a serious study. And usually they're students that are studying your work. They call themselves your students simply from the wonderful work you've done, such as Bronze Age America, America BC. It certainly is a teaching tool. And they, many times...
I'd like it to be a teaching
tool. It really
tool.
is. It really is. I highly recommend it for anyone
thank you.
that wishes to get a start. But when they first come to that realization that Columbus wasn't the first person from the old country.
It's not that he wasn't a great navigator. He was a great navigator. He managed an expedition probably better than anybody else had ever done it before. But he had the good fortune to live in an age when Spain had just unified itself from a whole group of little petty kingdoms, had driven out the last of the Saracens, and was ready to expand, had money, ambition, and a country just ready to take advantage of what Columbus discovered. All the previous visits to America apparently were made by people not on any organized basis. They were accidental, or fishermen who happened to find their way here in a storm, or people just doing some minor trading expedition of their own, not linked with any great comprehensive government, just with some kind of petty kingdom that they had all over the place in the Dark Ages. So we, of course, honor Columbus, but there were people here before him.
Yes.
I think he knew about it too.
I think so. If I could ask you another question that I know everyone would like the opportunity to ask you. In all of your works, which did you find the most exciting? Which drew your attention, full attention, probably more than perhaps other location sites?
In epigraphy, I mean?
Yes, sir.
I think I would say I have to have two. First of all, I was tremendously excited to find ogham here. I'd seen it in Scotland and learned what it was, and could hardly believe my eyes when I saw it here. What was it doing here? No, people didn't use ogham in the time of Columbus or after, so it had to be older than that. And then the second big exciting find was Peterborough, the site in Canada. I had lived in Denmark and learned to read Old Norse, and I speak Danish and Norwegian, and I could see these letters in the old, very, very old Norwegian alphabet, spelling words with the vowels left out, but I could see that the words were appropriate to the pictographs that were beside them. There would be a man, it'll have NN, it just left out the A, it was a man. There was a mummer, or a clown figure drawn, looking something like the March Hare, and it would have beside it in the Old Norse letters YLMN. Well, YL can only stand for Yule, that's Christmas in the modern Christian, but in the pagan days it was called Yule. Well, they still call it Yule today. These figures were Yule men, and they were clowns making everybody happy on the occasion of a New Year festival, apparently, which was held at about the same time as we celebrate Christmas. But these people were pagans long before they knew about Christmas. That was very exciting, and I must say I was very disappointed when it received such a hostile and unbelieving reception from the Canadians living in that area. The professors, I can show you a newspaper clipping where the professors call me a maniac or something or other. And it's strange, but it's what they would call a twist of irony, that it's that site which caused me so many problems with the archaeologists, which has become the site where they're now confirming that my work is right.
Isn't that wonderful? I'm really happy for you, Dr. Fell, and I'm going to be looking forward to some of your comments on Petersboro.
I think we've got a long way to go yet. There are a great many archaeologists who are not at all convinced, and I think there are some that we never will convince. I think it's like relativity, you know. A lot of people never believed in relativity. The physicists, they simply died and went away, and the young men who replaced them started to think that relativity was something wonderful. I think we still have to wait for a new generation of archaeologists, those who are now graduate students and assistant professors without tenure, perhaps, who don't like to open their mouths too wide at this stage. I think they're the ones who are going to advance the subject. Linguists, of course, have got to be involved. And Professor Kelly, who has confirmed my work as a linguist, well-known linguist.
Well, I certainly have to say that your work has certainly inspired me. It has inspired thousands that I know of, and I just want you to know that coming from our entire viewing audience, we thank you for making a stand.
Well, I do appreciate your kind remarks.
We thank you for sharing that information.
I feel good when I know that people are interested and enjoying it, as you say.
Well, without embarrassing you, you are very well loved throughout the world from your work and that wisdom that has been shared.
Well, thank you, Pastor. The subject, ladies and gentlemen, today is megaliths. Megalith is a compound word made from two Greek roots, meaning large stones. And as an example you can see here, a megalith from Wales, there are about 4 or 5 vertical stones supporting a massive stone on top. Here's yet another one that looks very perilously balanced, and I don't think we can claim that the original engineers constructed that one to last 4,000 years. It has probably been restored in modern times. 4 vertical pillars carrying a massive capstone. These megaliths are called dolmens. Dolmen is an artificial word made up from Breton language words and means literally a table stone, because some of the examples do look like stone tables. Some of the examples we've been looking at, which have a particularly massive stone on top, are called cromlechs. And here's a table stone that's gone awry. Perhaps it's partly collapsed at one end through the passage of time. It had a flat capstone, as you can see. This example, which is in Cornwall, is known as a coit. That's the Cornish word for a dolmen. It has a flat top, as you can see, although the top is tilted. It may have been used as a grave originally. Here's another view of the Cornish coit. There may have been an ancient chief's body buried in the chamber of this dolmen. Not all dolmens were constructed as graves, however. Now here's one example of a cromlech with the great massive capstone curved like an arch. Cromlech means an arch stone. This example, also in Cornwall, seems to have only 2 supports and quite a precarious operation balancing it like that. There's another even larger one in France, constructed the same way, which some years ago was struck by lightning and destroyed. Here's another example of a cromlech. This example is in Ireland and is particularly noteworthy for the enormous capstone supported on only, apparently, 2 vertical pegs. It's a cromlech too. We don't know who built these objects. People of the late Stone Age and early Bronze Age, 3,500 BC to 300 BC. This example's in Ireland too. And this is a really remarkable one. Tourist views of Ireland, this enormous flat capstone supported on two pillars. We don't know why it was erected. It doesn't look as if it would have been a suitable grave. The one we're looking at now is an example in Portugal. It featured on a Portuguese stamp some years ago. It's a tourist attraction and it dates from this remote period, the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Bronze Age, around about 3,500 to 3,000 BC. This one is also in Portugal, and is remarkable because it was being used as a home by a family of gypsies. One wonders what other uses dolmens might have had as ages rolled by. They were built at the end of the Stone Age and at the beginning of the Bronze Age, and yet they persisted all through history right down to the present time, and they must have served various functions at different times. This one, I believe, is a French one. They're scattered around the coastal areas of Europe, you notice, the localities. This is another French one, similar to that one we saw from Cornwall, I think, where there are just two supporting stones. The people who built the megaliths of this type, dolmens, seem to have been seafarers because they erected them along the coastal strips of various countries in the Old World. This, I believe, is also in northern France, Brittany. And this one is the Orkney Islands, north of Britain. May have had some relationship to the ancestors of the Vikings because we find them also in Scandinavia. The one we're looking at now is a typical cromlech with an enormous capstone, probably weighing about 90 tons, supported on smaller stones. This is in southern Sweden. And here we have a different view of, I think, the same dolmen. It's southern Sweden anyway. I believe it's a different view of the same one. These are interesting because they're the ones most similar to dolmens that we find in North America. The one you're looking at now is at Lynn, Massachusetts, and is definitely of the Scandinavian type. Cromlech, enormous capstone. Now we're moving into New York State. This is on the border between New York and Connecticut, at a town called North Salem. An enormous, it is the biggest dolmen in North America so far as we know. The capstone of that one weighed 90 tons, according to the local engineer, city engineer told me that. This one's in New Jersey. Stands on 3 peg stones, an enormous cromlech, about 50 tons, I think. This is another view of a New York dolmen showing the manner in which it's supported. I think there are about 5 or 6 supporting stones there. People often ask, how were they constructed? This is in New York. How were they constructed? How could ancient people make such things? We believe that they piled up dirt and embedded the supporting stones. Here's another view of that same one showing the supporting stones. We think they embedded the supporting stones in the dirt and then covered it completely and then rolled the capstone up on logs. This is in New York too. All the American dolmens, not nearly all the American dolmens have enormous capstones and are therefore of the cromlech type. People used to think they were accidental productions of the Ice Age. They're not, they're man-made. This one is moving along the St. Lawrence Seaway to Michigan. It's one of the most inland dolmens we know, although it's not far from the Great Lakes. This is another view of a Michigan dolmen. And this one was a surprise to us. It's one of several that occur in Wyoming. They have only just been discovered and reported. It's, again, of the cromlech type. Wyoming is inland, so it was a surprise to us to see one there. Now we're in Massachusetts. This is Cape Gay Head on Martha's Vineyard, locally known as the Viking's Tomb. It might even have been a Viking's tomb, possibly. Here's one of the few American dolmens which have a flat capstone. We're not sure whether it's really ancient. It might have been something made in modern times by some landscape decorator or artist. Another category of megaliths are the great stone circles, of which Stonehenge is an example, as you see there. We have nothing in America comparable to Stonehenge. That's the biggest structure of the kind in the world. But we do have these structures that you see in this slide called medicine wheels. This one's in Wyoming, quite close to the dolmen that you saw in Wyoming a few moments ago. They're astronomical observatories and a whole subject in themselves, so that I won't say anything more about Stonehenge circles in this talk, as they're a subject to themselves, but I just mention their existence as a type of dolmen, as a type of megalith, I beg your pardon. Now we're looking at something quite different again. This is a subterranean chamber, stone chambers made of massive stones, and the one you're looking at is in Denmark. This is another view of the same chamber in Denmark. They're scattered all over the megalithic world, that is to say, all the coastal areas of Europe and the Atlantic coasts of North America. This one's in England, an underground chamber of quite large proportions, used as a burial ground once. This one's on the coast of northern Scotland, in the northernmost tip of Scotland almost, and was probably a fortress built during about 200 or 300 BC, perhaps by Celts fleeing from southern England as the Belgian Celts invaded and drove the older Celts out. So these were probably built by Gaelic-speaking Celts. This is another view of the same structure, and it's showing the entrance of a huge triangular stone over the entrance to the fort. These are called brochs. Here is another stone chamber in Ireland this time. We don't know the purpose it served, but it's still well preserved. You notice there is no mortar used in these megaliths. They are just loose stones. Now we move across the Atlantic to North America. We're now in Vermont, and this is a picture of myself coming out of an underground chamber that had not been fully excavated. The chamber was discovered by a farmer when he was ploughing. He suddenly found a hole in the ground, and when he looked down, he found there was an underground chamber. And that's the interior of that same chamber, right underground in Vermont. This is another chamber. This is in Vermont too, the largest stone chamber in America so far as we know, and it's entirely above ground. It is oriented to serve as an astronomical observatory. And this is the entrance to it, which points, let me see, it points to the winter solstice sunrise. And in this day and age in which we live, it's all under snow, so it must have been built at a time when the climate was more moderate than it is now. Here's a wooden model of how the chambers are constructed. They're made of unmortared stone, as I said, in this shape, and the long axis pointing through the doorway always points to some astronomical direction, the sunrise or the sunset at some specific time of year. So you see they could regulate their calendar by observing the behavior of the sun. And calendar regulation was necessary in order to ensure that the plants were planted at the right time. This is the interior of that same massive chamber you saw in Vermont, the one above ground, with enormous stone slabs laid across to form the roof, as you see. Another view of the same chamber. It's a really magnificent structure. I'm happy to say that steps are now being taken to have the structure preserved as a national monument. Megaliths sometimes have these concentric circles with a cup at the center. They're called cup and ring, and cup and ring patterns. The one you're looking at is in Scotland. It's very typical of megalithic art. We have similar examples in North America to the one you just saw of the cup and ring pattern. They occur especially in the southern states. Now we're seeing a totally different version. This is the pattern known as the maze or labyrinth of the Minotaur, and it's the pattern that appears on one side of coins struck by the ancient Greeks in Crete. It has a very definite arrangement of each of the curves and strokes, and the remarkable thing is that the pattern appears pretty well all over megalithic territory. The one we're looking at is in Cornwall. Now we see one that's in Arizona, and is sacred to the Hopi and Pima Indians of the southwest. They believe it to represent the bowels of the mother goddess. These are patterns found with megaliths, and the remarkable thing is that they occur on both sides of the Atlantic, although they date back so far, they're long before Columbus. Here's another kind of embellishment on a chamber. This is on one of the lintels in New England. 3 vertical strokes. Now we can't prove it, but they believe the 3 strokes are the 2 letters BL of the Ogham alphabet, and that it's spelling the word Bel, which was the name of the sun god to the ancient Celts and to many other people. Same word as Baal, used by the Semitic peoples. Now we are coming to a 4th kind of megalith. These are megaliths related to human sexuality, and you can see that there is a stone with a hole in it there. This is in Cornwall. Villagers who live today, or recently lived, in the vicinity of this manatee believed it had magical powers and used to pass their children through the hole in order to protect them from various diseases. It may have had that supposed magical property for thousands of years, because some of these traditions do live on in country people. We think it probably originally represented the vagina of the, or birth aperture of the mother goddess, who we believe was worshipped before it was understood that males also play a role in reproduction. We think mother goddess came first, and then only later were there father gods. If we look at another example now, we'll see one that's in New England, and perhaps had the same history behind it. Now we come to a series of monolithic stones, sometimes called sarsen stones, which are believed to represent the male procreative principle, the erect phallus. They're found again all over the megalithic world. This one we're looking at now, with a gentleman standing beside it, is in Bressay, Shetland, where there are also other megalithic monuments. We think these monuments date from after ancient man discovered that mating was necessary before babies could be produced, and the men then took on the dominant role in sex. This is an example in Portugal, very fine Phallic stone or sarsen stone. And this one's in Yorkshire, in England, in a churchyard. They had superstitions associated with them, and so the church was usually allowed to use these areas where there are megalithic stones as burial grounds, and ghosts were associated with them, therefore. Now we're coming to the New World. This one I think is called the Hippo stone. It's in northern New York State. It could be a stone abandoned by the great glaciers at the close of the Ice Age. It was not necessarily a man-made construction, but it no doubt had significance to the Indians living there. Others again are definitely man-made. This one is one of several that I and my companions found in northern Vermont when we were exploring there in the early 1970s. The Phallic stone was lying flat on the ground. We erected it into that position before we photographed it. There's another one. Undoubtedly they were intended to be in that standing position. And yet another one. This one apparently with a scrotum and developed at the bottom as well. It's my friend John Anderson who did a lot of the exploring with me. These are all in northern Vermont and they were quite unknown before we discovered them. Now here's one in Ireland which differs from the ones we've been looking at up till now. You'll notice those notches cut across it, showing through the lichen. That is part of an Ogham inscription. And if I remember correctly, it says something about a Christian who was buried, and that was his tombstone. But we know that the Christians didn't make these phallic stones. St. Patrick authorized Christians to deface the pagan stones and reuse them for Christian purposes if they so desired. In that way they managed to use pagan chambers as churches. Here's a fallen phallic stone in Ireland, and it too has a very clear Ogham inscription on it. It's a memorial to a dead Celt. And he was a Christian, so that was not the original inscription, if there was one. That's been put on later on in the Christian period. And there's another view of an Irish one with an Ogham inscription of the Christian period. The strokes you see there operate something like the barcode that you see on objects in shops these days. Each number of strokes standing for a letter of the alphabet is another example. Crossing the Atlantic now to Vermont, after having discovered, as we did, these plain phallic stones and the chambers there, it was only to be expected that we would find phallic stones with Ogham cut on them, and we did. Only this is not Christian Ogham. This is very much older Ogham, and we're not sure how it's to be translated. We think it relates to the sexual function and is an appeal for fertility, but we're not sure. I'm warned by linguists not to be too ambitious about translating these very old inscriptions, so we don't know enough about the old language. Here's another one that was built into a farm wall in Vermont, and carries a long Ogham inscription on it. You see only a portion of it there. And there's another, not a phallus in this case. This is just a piece of natural bedrock with some Ogham cut in it. It indicates, I believe, that that was a fertility site for young men entering manhood. Since Ogham is an alphabet that we associate more particularly with the Celts, especially the Celts of Britain, we can't help but suspect that these structures were used or maybe even constructed by Celts. If they were not constructed by Celts, then Celts used them later. Here we have a painting on the ceiling of one of them in New Hampshire depicting the Semitic goddess called Tanith, the spouse of the sun, the female sun goddess, I should say. That was a surprise to us. It indicates that Semitic people were also present in Vermont at one stage. Now we're looking at a class of burial chamber found in Britain in a mound. A great mound has been erected over the stone chamber. You're seeing there only the entrance. I think the next slide may show, yes, the next slide shows a plan view of such a burial mound, this one in Portugal. The ones in Portugal most closely resemble the ones we find in America. You notice stones are used in its construction with layers of dirt between the stones, and the skeletons are found in the chamber in the middle at the bottom. The kind of skulls that are found in these European mounds are generally of the type called dolichocephalic, that is to say long-headed people. It's fairly common to find long-headed people living around the seacoasts of the old world. It might be an effect of their diet, perhaps eating a lot of fish might perhaps have something to do with their long heads. Long heads are found elsewhere. They're found occasionally in the northern parts of the USA. This is an Indian. And this view of the top, looking down on the skull, you can see it's longer than it is broad. That's why we call it a long head. That's a dolichocephalic skull from northern New England. We too have burial mounds, not so many of them, but we do have them. This one is at Moundsville in West Virginia. It's totally dirt, except for stones piled around the burials in the middle. That's the diagrammatic cross-section. And in it was found these remains, a round-headed person and an engraved tablet, shown the lower right there. The tablet was examined by a professor in Europe at the time. This was found about 1840. Professors in Europe at the time declared the writing to be Iberian, that is to say, ancient writing of Spain and Portugal. Another tablet of the same type was subsequently found in a stream bed, and it too has Iberian writing. We believe it indicates the name and relationship of the person buried in the mound. Some dolmens or burial chambers in Europe, as this one, for example, in Portugal, have weapons carved on the surface. This one has a sword and some other features. Interestingly enough, we also find that in North America. This is a capstone of a collapsed dolmen in northern Vermont that John found when we were exploring in around 1974 or 75, and it represents an ancient type of battle axe crossed with what appears to be a fern frond, as if peace and war crossed. Who were the people that built these structures? To get more information on that, we have to rely on archaeologists who carry out excavations. I'm an epigrapher. I study inscriptions, and I am not authorized to excavate. Here are excavations being undertaken by the Archaeological Society of Tennessee. And these are the kind of burials they were finding in that position of the legs tied back to the trunk before the bodies were buried. And the society kindly made it possible for me to study the skulls and also the artifacts found with them. We have here round-headed skulls, as you can see, short skulls, but very markedly protrusive jaws. These people look like pygmies. They're quite small, and they look like the pygmies who live at the present time in the mountains of Indonesia. We wonder if those people might have crossed somehow into America and settled in Tennessee. It seems remarkable, but they were pygmies. With them, in the same graves, were found these very typical skulls which look like Europeans, flat-faced, not protruding jaws, and a large cranium, as you can see. And here are the very large jaws of one such skull. These look very much like the skeletons found in old Scandinavian graves in Scandinavia, people who lived there before the Vikings, whose children became the Vikings. Here we think we have a picture of one of the people whose skulls we've just been looking at. This is from Maine, and it's a carving on bedrock showing a man with the staring features that you get in Celtic art, especially in Ireland, and he's wearing the oak leaves of a druid, and in the original, I don't see it very clearly in this picture, but the original, oh, there it is, you can see the acorn. You see it as an oak. And these were characteristic features of the Druids of the Celts. I think there we have our answer as to who are the people who occupied these chambers and who cut the Ogham inscriptions that we've been looking at. But they may not have been the people who built the chambers. They may have inherited them from some still earlier race that crossed the Atlantic and brought the megalithic style of architecture to North America. In another talk on another occasion, we'll look into the peculiar megaliths that are represented by Stonehenge and the great stone circles. Thank you.
I can hardly help asking one more question. Would you allow me? And it may be a different subject for a different time, but Camocaco in Yucatan. I understand that you're about to come out with another work on that.
Yes, I think I made a mistake when I said there were two. There are three exciting episodes in my life. I was forgetting about the one that's not yet published. Yes, that is a truly exciting site. I shouldn't say too much about it until we do a proper program on it, because the evidence should be seen before we make wild claims. But I could say in brief that this site clearly is it's a pyramid that was constructed over a period of 600 or 700 years, passing from the late Roman Empire to the collapse of the Mayan Empire in the 9th century. So somewhere around about 200 AD to about the 9th century AD. It covers that span of time. And during that span of time, people were visiting Mexico. It's located in southern Mexico. People were visiting Mexico apparently in a continuous stream from the old world countries, North Africa and Europe, bringing their various languages and alphabets with them and their religions. Christianity appears as the earliest of the religions, and that's because the first people came from North Africa, and North Africa, as you know, was the first area in the old world to become Christianized, Egypt especially. And then it was followed by the Byzantine Empire, and that was followed by the Islamic Empire, which imitated the Byzantine art and coinage, but of course was based on the Muslim religion. And that was, and all this time that was going on, there were also Mayans there. The whole way through there are Mayans, and then suddenly it stops. The last things we see are the workings of the Muslim fortune tellers, using the zodiac, casting fortunes by the planets, position, what do you call it, astrology, astrologers. We see their drawings and engravings. Those are the last things we find. And then it stops. The pyramids cease to be built anymore, and the Mayan civilization pretty well vanished.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to your work coming out, and we're going to keep in touch.
I look forward to presenting it to you if you'll be so kind as to come again for that.
Oh, we certainly will. And
it's not ready yet, but it will be soon.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you feel as privileged as I do that we have been invited in this home, and this gentleman that sharing this information and knowledge with us. I think it's fascinating. The author of America BC and Bronze Age America, I know it is the work that started many of you into searching on your own, looking at the markings left behind in history, trying to understand, and following examples and the lessons that Dr. Fell has given us in his various works through the Epigraphic Society, as well as those great books. What a wealth of knowledge and information. And we are proud to announce that he's going to share at least 2 more programs with us, even in this setting. And if he will continue, we're going to bring them to you so that this platform can be shared to let the world know that history speaks for itself, the stones speak. The alphabets of the world speak. And may we relax as we read these and listen to the scholars such as Dr. Fell and absorb the knowledge and information, and to know that everyone that wrote upon a stone was not necessarily a college professor. They were many of them lay people. And may we take all these things into consideration as we open our eyes and look into history, for the stones indeed do speak. Dr. Fell, it is a pleasure again having you here with you. And,
Pleasure's mutual.
And we look forward to the next time. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
How wonderful to see and to hear, one with experience, one with wisdom. You know, I have this thing about the academic world, which states so clearly that there could, in part of them do, that there is no possibility that anyone could have walked these shores before Columbus, 1492. That's fairly recent. And I thank God for a man that when he sees, both from the academic world and yet a man that has enough common sense to get out in the field and to see, and when he sees a fact, to be able to analyze that without fear of smudging his credentials, because facts are always respectable. And to say, I would like to understand this, is healthy, always has been. I would like to just say, I wonder, you know, here we have people that will walk through the wilderness and, what is this? It's a stone weighing 20 tons on top of 4 other stones. It's a dolmen made by the American Indian. That's certainly not to take away from the greatness of the American Indian, but did the American Indian have a dream that they have one of these in Scotland, they have one of these in Europe, we should have some here in the Americas before Columbus comes to discover that we are simply savages here roaming the plains and the mountains and the prairies, and so that we can give the academic world something to worry about. In this dream I observed, you know, man has always been a migrator. And I find it ridiculous that the academic world, and I'm not calling names, I'm just trying to draw out with courage those that should say, I'm a scholar and I have been behind my desk studying for many years. Have you ever been out in the field, friend? You see, as long as you're studying books, and we have as, quote, book learning, you really don't have any experience in the field of seeing the magnificence of the historical sites in the Americas. I wonder how it would be that here we have come in from 1920s into 20s. We're now in 1990. And I would suppose in that vast amount of time that we look up at the moon, and let's say that 200 years from now, that some other planet lands on the moon and they say, ooh, what is this? What have we found here on this great lunar planet? Well, it is a piece of cloth with stars and stripes, with stars in the background. Well, I do believe that it is a fake American flag. No doubt those that lived here before us had a dream, and they have placed this fake America. It's obvious, I would stake my credentials on it, that this American flag is fake. To think that man in his migrations, from 1920, when he could barely flap his wings and through the Wright brothers and get off the ground, get airborne. And in that very short span of time of, say, 1970, 80, say 50 years, would actually walk upon the moon. And yet you have supposedly scholars in this country today that do not believe that man in thousands of years would have walked the Americas when in a 50-year period man walked the moon. How small can man's mind be? And how longer must we go? How much longer must we go before the American people begin to recognize scholars with common sense that are able to say, look, this is ancient. It was placed here. This is a form of communication, whether it be a petroglyph or whether it's a pictograph or a dolmen or whatever the case may be. There is an explanation. If we search, if we examine, if we research, will there be mistakes made? Oh, I'm sure there will be, and I'm sure there have been a few in the past. But is it not healthy that we open our minds and move the shackles, the boundaries, that our credentials and our life must stand on this one subject? I thank God for a man like Dr. Barry Fell that is not afraid of what someone might say, but has been there, has seen, and has accomplished the many works that he has. So, in his book, America BC, what happened in America before Christ? I just want to read. This book is available, and if I'm not mistaken, in one of the series we'll run there in San Diego, you will see it. This is available. The ISBN number is 0671 555 030, and it is published by, let's see, I thought the company would be there, by Pocket Nonfiction, published by Pocket Books, New York. America BC, Ancient Settlers in the New World by Dr. Barry Fell. I just want to read, if I may, what the Reader's Digest had to say about America BC. Thank God people are beginning to wake up in our great nation. And I read, America BC, it has long been taken for granted that the first European visitors to American shores either sailed with Columbus in 1492 or may have been Norsemen like Leif Erikson a full 5 centuries earlier. But the history of our land before that date has so far remained lost in native Indian legends. Now, Harvard professor Barry Fell has uncovered evidence to replace those legends with myth-shattering fact. I repeat, fact. With illuminating text and over 100 pictures, he describes ancient European temple inscriptions from New England and the Midwest that date as far back as 800 BC. I repeat, 800 BC. He examines the Phallic and other sexual-oriented structures found in our own country that reveal the beliefs of ancient Celtic fertility cults, cults that were virtually destroyed in Europe in early Christian times. Further evidence has been found in the tombs of kings and chiefs in the form of steles, written testimonies of grief carved in stone. Now, thanks to the genius of a single man, we must include in our American heritage fighting Celts from Spain and daring Semitic seafarers from Carthage, Libya, and Egypt. Who knows how many others will be added before the end of Barry Fell's epic voyage into the past. Comment by Reader's Digest. So I thank God for this man, Barry Fell, and his work and his generosity in sharing it with the American people. May we applaud him in his endeavors. And in our series, may there be many more, as the wisdom that God has granted this man through his hard work and field experience, that we see, know, and understand more about our country, that we're able to hear the rock speak to us through the communications portrayed there or left there by ancient travelers. Again, we thank Dr. Fell and his lovely lady for sharing their home, for our equipment, and sharing his knowledge on these things. We ask God's blessings on both of them, and may he send us more in the future, more men like Barry Fell.